Good night, everybody, and welcome to this In Conversation at the NAGB virtually for the show From Time, Water Has a Perfect Memory. Tonight, we're in conversation with some really great experts, and I'm going to allow them to introduce themselves and say a little bit about their work. We can start with Will at the top of my screen.
Good evening. My name is Will Tomlinson, and I'm here with Idea Relief, which was formed after Hurricane Dorian as a private sector marine-based response. We started off back in early September, watching Hurricane Dorian roll through Abaco, and put together a group of private boats that ended up coming into Abaco and evacuating over 600 people over the 4 days of the 5th, 6th, 7th, and the 8th of September. From then on, we've been on the ground and had a presence in Abaco. We started off moving from the evacuation into moving search and rescue teams around, medical teams, working with World Central Kitchen, moving food to all the keys for 3 months, to Guana Key, to Scotland, Elbow, Man of War, and Lovers. We then moved on to working with schools and trying to get different foundations involved with different areas that they didn't know throughout Abaco. And as of April this year, we started a lovely food program, which sadly, due to COVID, grew quite exponentially. And along with the help of Jana Stone here from Open World Relief, we've been working together now since early April. And that's been an ongoing project in the realm of food security, moving up to 14, 15,000 people a week. We've been helping support with food parcels. On top of that, we've been working a little bit in the shelter space with some donors, and quite a large section with the wash space. We're currently running 3 reverse osmosis units in Treasure Key, helping coordinate another one in Cooperstown. And as of next week, we are helping to truck that product that we are doing across Abaco for the following 2 months until the end of January. So we'll be continuing in the wash space, helping the most vulnerable in Abaco for water needs. But yeah, we are a very new NGO. This is definitely a sidestep for myself. My background's in entrepreneurial business growth, starting businesses and running them in mainly the hospitality realm, but having a long history in the marine sector in this country and in Australia, where I also spent a lot of my time.
Who next? Me?
Go ahead.
Yeah. Do you want to go?
I'll go.
Okay, good.
Okay. Hi, my name is Jana Stone. I am with an organization called Open World Relief. I'm in disaster relief. I've been doing this for 4 years. I came into this work through the social justice realm after standing with the indigenous people of the Standing Rock Reservation in North Dakota for many months, and supporting their efforts, standing alongside them and figuring out how to help them not die in negative 40-degree weather. And they were amazing, and just with a little bit of support, we were able to assist them in standing strong in a fight to keep their clean water, the only clean water source for their reservation, where corporate oil interests were attempting to run a pipeline under their only clean water source. And so they were pushing against that and pushing for recognition of their treaty rights, which had been ignored by the US government for a very, very long time. And so at times there were 20,000 people in that encampment, and it took a lot of outside assistance to be able to assist with that and keep everyone healthy. And so they did end up building that pipeline. It did leak as we thought it would, and it did pollute their clean water. So that really girded me and pushed me forward into wanting to help the most vulnerable, the most oppressed in any way possible, in any way that I could. And so I went from a very full career as in property management, celebrity property management, in a high-end ski resort town in Colorado for 20-something years, to becoming a full-time unpaid volunteer for the past 4 years. And so it's been far more it's just been more fundamentally supportive to me as a human being to be able to do that than a paycheck ever could be. And so in working with Open World Relief, we have now, I believe this is our 5th hurricane that we've assisted with. We spent 2 years in Puerto Rico helping the most vulnerable there. And from Puerto Rico, we came to Abaco after Hurricane Dorian. We got there the first week and assisted for several months. And then luckily we connected with Will in Idea Relief. And so we've been able to be much more effective with him and the resources that he's been able to bring to the table. And so together we've been able to really make some magic happen. And that's been a very beautiful thing. But my overall interest and view and love is to find those who are the most forgotten. A lot of times that ends up being people who are undocumented. In all 5 hurricanes where we've been, it's the undocumented people that have the hardest time, who feel that they have the least support, who are coming from a place of fear. And those are the people that we try to seek out and make sure that they're able to get the resources that they need. And so that's what really fuels me to be able to continue in this work. And besides that, I have a master's degree in psychology and an undergraduate in fine art. So I try to, at least that brings the support that I need personally to be able to live and survive in a disaster zone for 4 straight years. So it allows me to be able to have, you know, the resources and sort of the tools that I need for making it through that. And however that can spill out into my work, I try to assist others, you know, using those tools as well. Thank you for having me.
All right. So not gonna lie, this is some tough acts to follow. Let's be very honest. When Zira mentioned to me who we were having for the discussion, I was just like, cool. It's good. It's good. My name's Natalie Willis. I am the associate curator, title change as of a few months ago. I'm the associate curator at the NAGB, and I'm co-curator of this traveling exhibition with Ziria. And I've been at the National Art Gallery for 5 years. It'll be 6 years in March in a curatorial capacity. And this traveling exhibition is one of the first sets of programming that I was able to help build out, along with my then colleague, Abby Smith, who was our education officer then. And it's definitely, for me, it's some of the work that I think is most close to my heart, because I'm also from Family Island. The whole reason that we built it out, for anybody who's not fully aware, is that we wanted to be able to make sure that the National Collection was just that. Because, you know, if it only exists in the center that is Nassau, and, you know, the rest of, you know, the constituents and citizens of the country don't get to have access to it, is it really a national collection? It's like, feels like a bit of a misnomer. And for me, it was just really, I think the way that I conduct myself in general is on this idea of, you know, paying it forward, whatever it is. And for me, growing up, I didn't have all that much access to a lot of what Bahamian art was, or a lot of fine art in general, which really impacted my applications for university when I decided I wanted to do art, right? So I got, oh God, this is like getting all personal, but I think this is important. I got rejected from all schools except for 2, I think, all because of the fact that, like, even though I had really good grades, good like extracurricular stuff, everything else, my work it didn't have a contemporary art sensibility, which is only really something that you know exists and learn to understand if somebody shows it to you, because it's kind of the way a lot of the art world works, which is what we're trying to fight here a little bit. We're trying to make things a little bit more of an even playing field. So being able to give like high school students and just Family Islanders, other Family Islanders in general, the access to this kind of work, it makes a really big difference in how we view not just art, but like our own culture and our cultural production, which has a really, really big say on how we view ourselves as people of the Bahamas, because not everybody in the Bahamas is Bahamian, people of the Bahamas. And I think it's really vital in building something out like this as a tool for helping understanding. So.
Thank you all so very much. I'm so happy to have you all here today. We're all happy. Just so everyone watching knows, we're going to be using the textbook definition of sustainability here. That is meeting the needs of today without compromising future generations' ability to meet their own needs. And that has 3 different pillars. They look at economic performance, environmental health, and social justice issues, or social health as well. And so we're looking at the whole thing when we say sustainability. And we're going to be using the term community work as a very blanket term to talk about work done not for profit, but for social justice or social wellness, whether it's volunteer or paid. But certainly the organization is working for that overall social good for any particular community. So we're going to go straight into the questions here. As a sustainist, I acknowledge that everything is connected and I see intersectionalities everywhere. And I thought getting community workers together with artists and having them talk about how their jobs have anything to do with each other could be a very interesting conversation. So I want to start by asking everyone on the panel if they do you identify as a sustainist or environmentalist in any way? And you can answer in any order that you feel comfortable.
Absolutely. But mainly because of like the desire to not be horrible to other people. If nothing else, it's like, we need a bit more empathy, guys, you know? But yeah, I think there's been like a lot of discussion in the art world in the past few decades about sustainability, because artists tend to be people who respond to like the times, right? In a lot of ways, it's cultural production is kind of how we get to know ourselves. When civilizations are dead and gone, what you usually find is the cultural production and the things from their like lived everyday experiences, as well as, you know, big buildings and all that nice stuff. So I think it's really important for, you know, us to be able to, as a community, respond to things that we see happening. And that's been happening in the arts for a really long time. And I think it's kind of weirdly becoming a bit of a, not weirdly, for very good reasons, but it's becoming very much like a faux pas, not even that, because that's not a strong enough word. There's a lot of criticality on institutions, artists, curators, anybody who's part of the art world on how ethically they're conducting themselves. And that sort of in relation to like wider ideas of sustainability, it's like, oh, you're getting your money from oil, right? For museums, because there's a lot of museums under heat for that. There's a lot of museums under heat for like, you know, oh, what's your workspace demographic like? That sounds problematic. You know what I mean? Like when you kind of break the numbers down. So I think it's very much tied to the art world to feel this sense of civic responsibility, because I think artists have kind of always been some of the people on the front lines trying to make sure that there's like awareness given to these things, being vocal, trying to like, you know, gain a sense of camaraderie and just traction on a lot of different issues, because like, you know, arts out of like the civil rights movement and everything else is just really interesting to see. So I think in general, I think to be a good art worker or creative cultural worker, you have to view yourself as sustainist. Otherwise it's a lie. Shots fired.
I very much identify as a sustainist. It's very difficult in the work that we do. We're having to use a lot of resources. We're having to send a lot of planes. Our group was responsible for 38 planes. It's very difficult to quantify that in terms of the human need or to mitigate that based on what the emergency needs are, especially right after a disaster. So it's always in the back of my mind. And then as we begin to help an area recover, how can we recover in a way that's more sustainable, that's going to assist in the next storm? There's always going to be a next storm. So how can we build back better in a way that is going to keep this from happening in such great magnitude and cause so much human suffering? Can we reduce that in any way and reduce our footprint at the same time? So that's always in the back of my mind. It's not always something that I feel that I have a great deal of ability to control or mitigate. So there's some pain around that. You know, how can we help it? How can we fix it? Climate justice is such a massive, massive issue, and climate migration all by itself, you know, the need of people to move and leave because they've been run out of a place because of the massive storms that are happening because of the climate change. So there's a lot of questions that need to be answered and need to be answered in a much larger way than those of us who are just, you know, on the ground trying to assist in the immediate aftermath of a disaster.
I very much, you know, identify as a sustainist. All of the practices that we do, we're trying to minimize, if nothing else, plastic. Obviously, with how we started was running evacuations in center consoles from North Eleuthera to here. We used a large amount of fuel. But at this time, those were the resources we had, and it's what needed. We've now looked at changing our tactics, obviously, to work further in the evacuation point of view with boats, but also coordinating with larger vessels so that we're keeping our fuel costs down. We're having a higher impact per dollar as such for moving people and really looking after the environment. But as Jana said, also one of the things is building resiliency, you know, looking at renewable energy, looking at different resources so that as we do build back this region, as we improve and however we help, we are minimizing damage to the environment. One of the projects we're working on at the moment is marine debris removal, and we'll be starting that over the next 2 months. And what that is really about cleaning up from everything that has been thrown into the water. And obviously, the Bahamians' major resource is the marine environment, from the reef, from tourism, from the fishermen. And we really need to look at the livelihoods and how we can affect both, you know, tourism for if boats are getting damaged by trees, et cetera, in the water. We're trying to help however we can to really bring back the region in the most sustainable way possible by making growing the economy at the end of the day so that people have jobs, they can fend for themselves rather than continuing programs that may cause reliability issues, sorry, not reliability issues, but dependency issues on these programs. So trying to work so that we're building livelihoods, people can restart the economy and really move forward.
Thank you all. That was a really great answers. So my next question would have been, how do you guys engage with that in your work? But you all answered that one time. So my next question is really, so I mentioned one of the pillars of sustainability is social justice. And so I wanted to hear from you guys how you engage with specific social justice issues in your daily work. And we can start with Jana maybe on this one.
It's so deeply challenging because I am from the United States. I'm coming to the Bahamas as a helper. And when I see social justice issues, it's not necessarily my place to stand up in the way that I would and have here in the United States for people who are oppressed and marginalized. It's a dance that I'm having to learn how to do as I go, really. One of the main issues were the people who are undocumented. Their housing was wiped out. Their home sites were never truly deeded to them. They didn't own them. So when it came time for them to rebuild, there's nowhere for them to rebuild. It's the Haitian population, obviously, that we're speaking of. And it's very difficult for me to see people who are suffering and to not call that out. Yet our position was tenuous in that we are always guests. This was not quite as difficult for us in Puerto Rico because it is a US territory. So I was able to help in sort of different ways there than I have been able to do on Abaco. One of the things that we were able to do is to set up the 2 homeless shelters, the 2 shelters for unhoused people in Marsh Harbor. So we were able to spearhead that and get that going. We were never able to truly get the permissions that we needed, honestly, but we moved forward and did it anyway because it was such a desperate need for people. And, you know, thankfully the government did sort of look the other way. They allowed it by default. And so that was a contribution we were able to make that I feel particularly proud of, because it wasn't necessarily agreed upon, or it was just outside of my comfort zone, to be honest, to do something like that without having full support of the government. But so I feel like a lot of times we are at odds, you know, and we are doing this dance and we are trying to provide what people need. It's not a situation where I can ever be political. I'm very, very careful to keep politics out of my relief work, because that's just going to reduce the amount of aid and resources that I'm going to actually be able to bring to the situation. And that's never going to be the best thing. It's not my place to be political, because I haven't lived my entire life there. I don't know what the very, very deepest social and cultural ramifications are of having undocumented people. I have been told stories from all sides. I can understand it to the best of my ability, yet at the same time, it's really for me to stand back and to support the local efforts that are already happening, and to support personally those who I see are doing the good work, so that they can stand up. So I can provide allyship to them, so that, and I can stay in the background and be quiet, because that's really my job more than anything. Now, you guys are Bahamian, so I'm interested to hear what your position is.
Really?
Okay, well, I guess in a certain sense, where I think it's kind of like, okay, I think the way that I'm thinking about this anyway is like, from hearing the way that you discuss the way that you like conduct what is very much a practice in human care, right? I think we kind of almost like we're on like a seesaw, or like we're like tag teaming very different aspects of like a wider thing, right? So you're doing very actionable things in very practical ways to make sure that people have a sense of security in their most basic needs, like massively important. And you feel that, you know, because it's a different space that you're coming into, that, you know, you don't have the same sort of groundings in, that it's your job to be quiet. And for me, it's like what I'm doing isn't something that's immediately saying to people's everyday needs. And I have to be political in what I'm doing. So for people who maybe don't quite know what the role is, there's a lot of different ways to be a curator. I know the word gets thrown around a lot for Instagrammers, but, you know, for the rest of us, and like, you know, kudos to y'all, do your thing. But for, you know, art curators and museum curators, a lot of the job is about trying to like socially and historically contextualize cultural production. And for me, because we're part of a national art museum, a lot of that job really centers around ideas of identity. And there's something about being able to sort of try to dig into that in ways that aren't so nationalist, despite it being a national institution, and like trying to find ways to like bring in stories from the margins into the work I do, because I do a lot of writing. I think there's something really important in that as an archive for the future, but also for trying to help push a paradigm shift so that you don't have to justify looking after and caring for people who might be in a slightly different demographic than you. That's part of what I consider my job as, is like trying to help facilitate tolerance and empathy, I think, more than anything. Sorry, that's my cat in the back. Juju agrees. So I think my practice, honestly, I think it's 90% rooted in social engagement in the first place. It's something I feel very personally responsible for. And I think that's how a lot of artists feel as well. So it's like, I think a lot of people within the arts feel like our job is to provide social commentary, and hopefully with a view to trying to help people remember that our humanity is the reason that we're all in this, right? Because, you know, if we're not fighting for that, then what are we fighting for? Everything else seems really quite pointless. And I mean humanity in its like totality, in the most sustainable of ways, as to ourselves, as to each other, as to the environment, as in our sense of security. like all of that. I think it's just, sort of tackling it from very different places. But yeah, I think my practice as a curator, I think the way that I've conducted myself is generally as a social justice curator.
It's incredibly important. It's an incredibly important position, because that starts to change what the tenor and tone is of the way that we speak of each other and the way that we are accepting of others, and to break down those borders of nationalism.
Yes.
That is what absolutely needs to happen on a more global scale as we move, as climate migration becomes a thing. We have to somehow let go of this deep sense of nationalism that keeps us so separated and keeps us in this space of greed of what our own country has, and keeping it for ourselves in fear, a space of fear of lack, that there's not going to be enough because of people coming. So we just have to, and that's a really giant question. It's a really overarching, and it's something that we're going to be facing more and more, that's not really being spoken about, on a global scale, or even, governmentally. No one's really speaking about this. So these sorts of ideas are what are generally birthed from the artistic community. It is your job, our job as artists, to begin this conversation. That's always where these new ideas are birthed, or began to be fleshed out. And, eventually it'll come more into the mainstream. It'll be more of a conversation that we can start to have. And eventually there will be some cultural shift around that, because it is where we're headed.
Absolutely.
Yeah, we are headed there. And it may be a long time, but it is the natural progression of humanity. So I really appreciate the work that you're doing. I have a great deal of respect for it.
Please know how utterly mutual and reciprocated that is, because Lord knows. Because I think there's also this thing with a lot of folks in the arts. I keep saying this thing, but I'm worried. I'm working on my words, guys. I'm working on my words. Bear with me. But I think there's this sort of feeling, especially when you're kind of thinking about how okay, art fits into all these different strata of society, right? And a lot of people were thinking about, sort of, high art, which is generally dealing with all the elitism and classism inherent in that. But there's a lot of conversation, particularly when you're in moments of crisis, of what is the purpose of art? Because if the purpose is to prop up institutions and systems that have historically marginalized people, and those people are currently in crisis, as we are now, then what is the purpose of inviting people into a museum to just look at something? You know what I mean? There's a difference. So it's if the way that you conduct your museum, gallery, art space is in a way to try to offer awareness to problems, offer spaces for discussion, offer, a chance for people to grieve sometimes, or to feel seen, because we had the Refuge exhibition couple months after Dorian, to allow artists to have space to begin to process. For some people, it was clearly too soon, but for others, it was, it was a really good opportunity to be able to think through things. And it's just it was, I think for our team, it just felt like offering a space for catharsis, and it aligned with the mental health work that we were doing, and the mental wellness work that we were doing at the NAGB at the time with the We Got You initiative, and trying to, in the midst of very important figures, making sure that people have basic needs for survival met, that we might be able to offer, as a space that's supposed to deal with culture and people, a chance for people to feel like people again, and to be able to deal with their sense of selfhood and their mental wellness and trauma. Because, it's, I think mental health in moments of crisis is always the thing that, especially climate crisis or environmental crisis, or, anything remotely like this, is people forget that, at the end of the day, it's you need these basic things to survive. You need food, water, place to sleep, clothes, all that. And you also need to be able to function in your everyday, because people aren't talking about, the way that essentially a lot of people give up on life when they're going through moments of trauma like this, whether it's in an immediate sense or after the fact. So like I was trying to get to is like, if art is supposed to be about sort of culture and the spirit of humanity, then clearly the thing that we would be best suited to was offering space to help, offer essential care to the spirit. And that was something spearheaded by Holly Bino, our former chief curator, who I very, very much care about, and who I think is also kind of, we kind of live in this space of being anti-institution while working in institution. I think you kind of need that, though. You do. I think you need that pushback in all these spaces. Because I mean, like, you guys are pushing back against the capitalist model that we work and live in, right? By trying to be like, no, people deserve to live for free. They deserve to be able to be alive without paying for it. Without having to worry about, being able to afford to live is like a really huge deal. So I think, yeah, there's a lot of, I think there's a lot of crossover of sentiment between the different factions of like relief work and care that people offer when they can. I think that's the thing that like kind of unifies it, is like, at the end of the day, if it's about care and people, then the practice is care.
Will, do you engage at all with social justice issues in your daily work?
Well, since day one on both the food and water program, the most important thing at the end of the day is, it doesn't matter where anyone's from. It's the most vulnerable get looked after. And that is what the whole reason that we came together and why we're in this realm, is to help other people. And the whole point of IDEA when it started was we would always help out in a situation where the greatest need is. And so as a marine-based group, to move into the realm of food security has been quite a jump. We've, teamwork here has taken it in our stride, going from a couple small conversations in early April to Jana and some of her teammates, and Willie, Jana and Greg, and one of my cohort with IDEA, Wilbert Odysseus, running around both Maxwell's and Abaco groceries with shopping carts, filling it so that we could get some food out, as all the distribution centers had no food, to becoming a very organized system where we have multiple trucking entities. We have 20 different distribution centers across Abaco, from Grand Key in the north through all of the keys to Sandy Point in the south. And out from day one, both with what we did and as part of the National Food Distribution Task Force, which IDEA is the Abaco team leader, we have said that we are here to help. No questions asked. That's, food security is food security. If you are food insecure and you don't have a way to feed your family, we are here to help. And that's what we've been doing since April. And it's as simple as that. It's the same thing with the water. People, sadly, some people with the water can't afford to run their wells that they may have at their house. They may not have, many people are still living in tents under parts of what was their house. They can't afford fuel for a generator. They're trying to get by to just patch up their house, so that hopefully that one day they can have a BPL connection again. And so at the end of the day, we're here to help, and that's what we've been doing. And it's at the end of the day, that's the love that everyone here brings to the table from different realms, and that's why we're here.
Thank you both. Thank you all. Natalie, and this question is really for Jana and Will. So Natalie talked a bit about art and institutions and curatorial practice. Do you see a space for art and that kind of work in what you're doing?
It's interesting that you bring that up, because personally, the way that I am able to stay sane through, my lifestyle, honestly, I don't really have a home base. I move as the disasters come. My home base shifts sometimes every couple of months, and it can be a little bit stressful. And the way that I personally mitigate that is with my art, and it's full on art therapy for me. It's a combination of art and therapy, and I wish that I could bring that in a larger way to be able to assist people in the community. And when I first started this work, I believed that was actually what the draw was for me. I believed with my trauma psychology background and EMDR and the art, I believed that is what it was that I needed to bring. That's why I showed up in Houston, Texas. But as it turned out, the need for me is not that. It has been, it's been more of just the very, very basic survival needs and being able to provide that for people. And so the requirement for the use of me is the way that I consider myself as a tool, and however I am best needed, that is the way that I'm going to show up in a community. And that's the work that I'm going to do. I just try to stay empty. I try to approach the situation without a great deal of agenda or belief in how, what my desire is or how I feel that I can contribute. And I just wait until the need is there and I find out how it is that I can help serve. It's really coming really from a very, very deep place of service. And I do see that there is a place for art. I haven't been able to provide it. I saw someone come and provide that in Abaco. His name is Benjamin. He's an amazing human being, and he painted murals. And he would get the children to come. And this was early on when the kids were, they're still very frazzled. There's no school happening. Their parents are freaked out. Their houses are destroyed. One thing that this man was able to provide was a beautiful setting where the kids would all come and help paint this mural. And he provided a sense of normalcy for them. And there were a lot of other adults around who were in a fairly balanced space psychologically, and that they were able to sort of minister to the children. And so, and also I use that word minister in a very non-religious manner. In other words, they were able to listen to the kids and find out, what was going on with them, and really just provide a fun outlet. And not just that, but a place where they could contribute to beautifying a community that essentially looked like it had been stepped on by Godzilla. And so in the midst of that, you don't want kids to feel normalized in a disaster zone that is that broken. You don't want them to get used to that. You really don't. They need to remain seeing how broken that is, yet, because you want it to be fixed, and for them to be able to retain a sense of psychological health for themselves, and the being able to get back down into your own body, to ground back into the earth, and to hold an art making material in your hands, and to see a color come off onto another surface and stand back and look at that. There's a grounding that can happen through that. It gets all of the senses engaged, and it can bring someone back to themselves. And that's one of the main things that needs to happen after someone survives a massive trauma, the way these people did. Thousands of people went through this incredible trauma of seeing their family members die, of seeing their community members float away. It's an unspeakable horror that some of these folks live through. And so the kids, they're probably the most resilient, but they also were absolutely as affected as everyone else. And so there is absolutely a place for art in even the immediate aftermath. And that's what I learned, being able to watch this man, and he was so incredible with these kids. And I wish that I could think of his last name right now, but I don't know what it is. And I'll have to get back with you. Because this is what he does. He goes from disaster to disaster. He brings the beauty, and he engages the community.
The goodness to Ben Swartz. The goodness to Ben Swartz. So he worked in both Nassau and all through Abaco. I'm not sure if he made it over to Grand Bahama, but I'm sure, Natalie, you've had experience with Benjamin and the team.
I was going to say we helped facilitate some of the work that the Goodness Tour were doing. And they also did stuff on site with us with folks who had been displaced in Nassau after the storm. Right. So it's just like, when you said the name, I was just like, I feel like this is the same guy. I hope it's the same guy.
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah, that's marvelous. So like, see, our work already intersected, to be very honest with you. Like,
he did amazing work. And it was really, I think, for seeing, so as you said, Jana, like Godzilla, the dinosaurs walked all over us, but then there's, bringing in a little bit of beauty and hope. And obviously, it's sort of when you have that first flower that comes out of the ground after you put it in the garden, and you see that first flower, it's exactly what that is. And it just, brings in hope. And, as you're both wearing Angelica's lovely branding. Actually, every day we have, as part of Idea Relief,
Nice.
very, very supportive of what she's done. And this is actually on the back of all of our shirts for all of our workers. So every day, wherever we are, we're bringing a little bit of hope, we think, through that.
Nice.
That's so lovely. I'm really happy to hear that. And I'm really happy to hear about the work that he did specifically in Abaco. That's good. So I want to ask Natalie potential controversial questions. So after listening to Jana, and we'll talk about, I don't know if Will had anything else
We
to
love
add
controversy. Let's go for it.
about the place for art in community work. Feel free to jump in if you will. But I also want to know what you think institutions, specifically like us, can do, even especially in the arts, to get more involved with the kind of work that people like Will and Jana are doing.
So for me, I think it's honestly, I feel like if we didn't have Holly questioning what institutions' place is in crisis, I don't know that we would have ended up with this model that we had, which I think is entirely appropriate. The mental health work that we were trying to do, offering like free therapy services, group therapy, individual therapy, going to the shelters, offering all kinds of like alternative, sort of practices for people to just find space to engage. We even had Reiki practitioners who went to the shelters, which sounds like the most hippy dippy thing you've ever heard. I know, for people who aren't really into that, but having set space away from everybody else and having energy worker work with you allowed some people the best sleep that they'd had that week, right? And something like that was like key, right? So I think, and this is what the controversy is, I think honestly, if people in institutions can give up on the artwork as it is and get to the human work that is what artwork is supposed to be about, then like it just makes sense. It feels like if you actually see your place in an institution, particularly for us, because we're paid on the public dollar, right? Because our operational budget, even though we're quasi-governmental, our operational budget comes from the government, right? So like if you are paid by the people, you are a public servant, and the only thing that you want to do is, in a moment of crisis, keep doing the thing that you did before and not be reactive to the moment. I think it speaks a lot to, sorry, cat. I think it speaks a lot to a sort of very misplaced sense of privilege that's rife in the art world that we talk about a lot. I know there's
Yes, Lord.
Yep.
Yeah.
You know the time.
Yeah.
And it's always like money's a really dirty thing to talk about in institutions, because it's like you have people being paid a certain amount, artworks being sold for certain amounts, and it's like honestly half of it is gross, right? But if you sort of think about more than yourself for 2 seconds and you just redirect what you have to suit the needs of the moment, because for a curator, your practice is supposed to be, I think, in a lot of ways responsive, whether it's to history or the contemporary or both, right? So if you're supposed to have an adaptive and responsive practice, why would you not translate that to a moment of crisis where you can do good in different ways? Like I personally see, if you work in a national institution, especially in small places like this, like you're a civil servant and you have a civic duty. So if you're not trying to find ways to make that as efficacious as possible, then you are just self-important and not doing the work. Like, yeah, simple as that. It's gonna probably ruffle a few feathers, but it's the truth.
Words there. So the show From Time that you were the lead curator on, one of the themes there is memory. Can you just explain a little bit about, just very briefly, what that sort of looks like in the show, the idea of memory?
Yeah, so I think sort of, again, like if I see a lot of my practice is dealing with sort of the social sector and dealing with humanity in a wider sense, then like identity is important and memory is a big part of how we get to know ourselves. Collective memory, national memory or history, like, things like that. And I think also important to think of memory as not just being something that exists in the brains of people, but something that kind of exists in the collective, right? In the sort of whether it's, you know, the collective of people or the landscape that you're in. I think there's something to be said for how, and I think if you're from the Caribbean, you feel this, there's something to be said for, you know, the landscape holding a certain kind of memory. So what we really wanted to dig into, me and Ziria, because she's taken a backseat there, but she was key in curating this, just saying. If we really are looking at what we want to get into this when we're talking about ideas of memory, it's using ways that we have in our public psyche, in the community, the wider Bahamian community, ways that we have found to survive and thrive in the past, how that can help us figure out a future that can hold us in a time and a space that's very untenable and uncertain. And it was before the pandemic, right? Like the funny thing is like this whole show, like the first stop was Eleuthera, and then we barely got to have anybody engage with the physical show because of the fact that it's, all of a sudden we went into lockdowns. It's really kind of crazy, right? But that's why I think it's, as much as it's frustrating to live on the internet during 2020, I think there's something really useful that we can have as a tool in terms of having this, like this exhibition online, because it's like offering, you know, space to engage with history. Like you can see in like the photographs, there we go. The photographs that are like in the exhibition, which this is another way I think memory needs to be considered, is that, you know, it's kind of like history. It's like, you know, who tells it is what makes it, right? So these photographs, very often people think of them as just purely like these, you know, documents of truth, right? When really it's more, rather than how we were as people back then, it's how we were seen as, especially the Black Bahamian populace, right? So it was like most of the people who would have had, you know, cameras and stuff. Like we had a really big history of having like colonial tourists come in. Some of that's not changed, but, you know, but specifically they come in to take photographs of the landscape, but then also using people as props in the landscape. So it's like, you know, as much as like you can see how somebody would have dressed or what parts of the landscape would have looked like, it's also how people wanted to shape them, right? So it's like knowing how we were seen, taking the way that this informs our sense of self and the ways that, like, you know, through independence, through a lot of grassroots activism, through riots, through slave rebellion, and something else, the ways that we've tried to take ownership of ourselves outside of colonial gaze as the majority Black population of this country, like, is a really important way to think about how you also build out your own sense of memory and self to be able to inform this sort of, I guess, ancestral download that you have, because, like, you know, there's all these like studies coming out talking about how, particularly for people who've undergone particular traumas as like communities, the ways that you have ancestral trauma that gets passed down in your DNA to different people. Right? So like, obviously we can consider that for the majority of Bahamians. So if we have this download, that's it. Thank you.
Yeah.
If we have this sort of wealth of knowledge that's sitting up in our physical bodies and our DNA, how can we kind of tap into that through looking at ourselves in the mirror, looking at our fellows, looking at the landscape, looking at the ways that we've found to try and find ways to sustainably continue ourselves and our future generations? Like, how can we use that to actually like think through a moment like this that feels so different, but is also kind of not? Because if you look at the work of Leanne Russell, who's an artist from Abaco, shout out Lily, and you see the fact that she's looking through these archives of family archives with works, photographs that informed works, but these photographs are from, I believe, 1932, when I think it was the Great Abaco hurricane passed through. Like, it's eerily similar to Dorian, the pathway, everything else. It's kind of crazy. And for me, I think the fact that she makes this work that, you know, tries to tie in this sort of history that's very much also in her blood, and like try to find new ways to think through the current moment, how it's similar, how it's not. I think that's key to what like the backing of the show is. That's kind of what we're digging at. Sorry, that was really long-winded, y'all, but I appreciate it.
So the reason I asked you to explain, because my question now to Will and Jana, maybe start with Will this time, is how have you seen in your work this theme of memory or history repeating itself coming up again in the work that you do?
Well, for myself at least, this is a new realm for me. So looking, so everything as I open every day, it's definitely a new sort of day, and I have no idea what to do. So memories for me in this realm, I have memories of Abaco as a region. I've been coming here to the region since 2012. I've spent 3 months living in Abaco prior to the storm last year, and I've spent, let's say, 12 months out of the last 15 here in Abaco. So I obviously have the memories on that side from me. And, I love Leanne's pieces, and that's been coming out. Know her very well. And I'm actually looking at a couple of her pieces where I am. She has up in the Green Turtle Club where I currently am. So it's, it's great. She's got a lot of pieces around here that have been here for, I think, over 10 years. So they were quite early on in her career. So it's for me at least, I love that piece of work that she is doing of doing the comparison of the storms. I actually do have one of the pieces myself of that. So I love that. And I think speaking to a lot of people and the memories, I love hearing the stories of before the storm and everything, and how happy it is, but also how happy every day people are on the new side of it, and being so content of where they are, that look, we've made it through, and we're making the best of it, and we're making our own new memories in places that we had old memories just due to what's happened.
Yeah.
Okay, so I'm going to ask my final questions. And so this is for each of you very briefly, because we want to make sure people leave with something they can take home with them. So I want to know what advice you would give a person, any random person who wants to get involved in the work that you do. And then what advice you would give specifically to an artist who wanted to get involved in community work.
I would suggest finding a group and joining them domestically, wherever you are, in your very own community, very, very locally. There's no need to have to get on a plane and run somewhere else. That makes it, that makes the work itself be an elitist, privileged thing, and there's no need for it to be that. There are people on your very street corner who may need your assistance. There could be an elder who's alone. There is always a way to bring a sense of service, a sense of how can the resources that I have, even though I may not be in the best position either, but maybe there is something that I have that can bring a little bit of ease to the life of a person who's near me. And once we begin to approach life from more of a position of service in that manner, and we realize that it really doesn't take, riches and all of your free time and everything else to be able to come from a sense of service. Once we realize the gifts that are returned to us in terms of our self-esteem and our understanding of our place on this earth and why it even might be that we're here, then our desire to continue that service grows. And it's like it's like a rock rolling downhill, and it can bring such an ineffable sense of beauty into your life that would cause someone to be insane like I am and work for years for nothing, because the sense of joy and the sense of connectedness to everything alive is so great that it shifts your very consciousness from a place of the consensus trance that we were taught to live in, that we live a material life of accumulation, and we sit in our ivory tower and we do what we do and then we die. This is a different way to live, and the way that we can start down this path is to find the person who's closest to us who needs assistance and help them.
I agree completely with Jana, and it's, I never saw myself going down this path. It's been the most unbelievably fulfilling 15 months of my life, and I wouldn't trade it for the world. It's definitely been some very long days and long nights, a little bit of lack of sleep here and there, but it's about getting out there and helping your fellow person, and just getting into it. It's really, there's so many groups. Just go online, find something that you're most passionate about, be it the ocean, be it about debris, be it about feeding. There's so many groups in the Bahamas, and just read up and find what really resonates with you, and just say, hey, I've got some extra time, how can I help? If you're an accountant, it may be helping them with their books and bookkeeping. All of these organizations run as a business, and they have to make sure you've got accountability for the donors at the end of the day. And through that, everyone has an asset that will be able to bring to this business, be it being able to just go out there and give a parcel of food, give a non-food item, whatever it is, and just being able to reach out and communicate with another human and be able to just help them in that moment of need. And I think everyone just needs to see that, there'll be a draw on one of these groups in the Bahamas, and there's so many amazing groups in this country in the non-profit world, and just going through and just saying, hey, I'd love to help, and just start the conversation. And I can tell you, it snowballs from there.
I think also something that's key in all of this, that is very much, I think, just a natural reflex for the work that Jana and Will are doing, is to learn to listen, like to truly listen to people without pretense, without judgment, and just find the value in that from anyone, like daring to be something bigger than yourself. Because I think that's the thing, is like learning to kind of put yourself as an individual aside to have something better, which is being part of the collective, is a huge, huge thing, I think, necessary in this work. Because if you realize you're not just doing it for yourself, there's something that I think taps into like this energy reserve that's like in there, and it just makes it just so much easier to be able to just kind of keep going, because this kind of work energetically is not necessarily always sustainable. It's hard, like it's emotionally difficult, everything else. And I think there's just something about remembering that it's not just you, and that you're in it together, that makes it easier for you to care for other people as well as yourself in a way that makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely.
I'm really, really, really glad y'all were on this. I'm not going to lie. I feel very, very privileged to get to know y'all through this.
Thank you.
Thank you all so very much. That's the end of our talk. So Natalie's going to lead the live in a tour of the virtual exhibition, but we want to thank Jana Stone and Will Tomlinson so very much for their time and being a part of this conversation, and we really appreciate you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for your time.
All right,
it's been a great evening.
Okay.
Thanks, y'all.
Take care.
So Natalie, we're going to do the virtual tour now.
All right, let's get it.
Do you want to share your screen, or do you want me to
do you mind sharing it?
Oh,
do you mind sharing yours?
No problem.
Thank you. Just because I know my connection's a little bit shoddy here, and I'm already risking it all with the video. I ain't gonna lie.
Oh, that's wonderful.
We do it for the people, man. We do it for the people.
Oh, goodness.
That's the theme. And I'm going to try keep it sort of succinct, but hopefully like juicy. So we got this. Oh, that felt like such a privilege, I have to say.
It was a really nice talk. I hope everybody out there enjoyed it. And if you still have questions, feel free to post them in our chats.
Oh yeah, we friendly.
We'll try and answer all the questions for you.
We're open people. We here for it.
And if you have questions during the tour as well, I'm sure Natalie will be willing to answer.
Yeah, babe. Happy to.
Well, okay, so it seems like Natalie's not the only one risking it all. So we will.
Internet.
Yes, the internet is doing internet things, but we live it now.
It's okay. We live in a pandemic. The internet is full. Let me see if I can. Maybe I can try figure. Let me see if I can get this together. Let's try. See. We got this.
I mean, it's coming up. It's just moving a little slowly. So we apologize for the delay, guys.
But we appreciate it.
We appreciate your patience.
Thanks for bearing with. Because Lord knows, especially now, it's just like, you know, when you most need it,
Right.
like, okay, that's just how it's gonna roll right now. But in the meantime, I can kind of give again some sort of.
Yes. Do you want to do a short intro while we try and pull this up?
Absolutely. So I think let me see, maybe best place to start is when we were thinking through what we wanted this ITE, so Inter-Island Traveling Exhibition, because that's why we call it that. That's the little abbreviation. We were trying to think through what this third iteration should kind of begin to dig into. So the first one that I did with Abby was called Max Amos, A Tale of Two Paradises, which I know is a bit of a mouthful, but it was looking at the different ways that particularly Black Bahamian artists have portrayed our landscape. Because, you know, as I was mentioning earlier, there's something really interesting about the way that we view the Bahamian landscape and how that's been tied to these ideas that Dr. Krista Thompson talks about called the picturesque, and the way that the Caribbean space was idealized as a picturesque, because it used to be considered, quite frankly, a hellhole of disease, which not really what we wanted, but it's like literally it was a space of exile for a lot of people. And then we got this sexy rebranding that made us suddenly, oh yes, you should go to the Caribbean. It's great for respiratory issues, pulmonary issues, and it became this space of health, right? Which is really, really interesting. So it's like we were looking at the ways that you know, Bahamian artists sort of either play into this idea of the Bahamas as a picturesque space or completely go against it. So that was like first iteration. The second iteration was curated by Abby Smith and my colleague, Richardo Barrett, and that was called Trans, A Migration of Identity. And that was largely trying to look at African cultural retentions in the Bahamas and how, you know, the forced displacements of West African people who were enslaved and brought here, how that informs, along with, you know, sort of colonial histories and everything else, how that informs the way that we view ourselves, which ties into the first one, right? So then this one is just like, okay, we just had Dorian. Everybody's traumatized. It feels difficult to begin to think about a future when people are dealing with so much in the contemporary, when people are dealing with so much in the current moment. And that's kind of why we were thinking about this idea of like dealing with things from time, like, because, you know, sort of crises and struggles and difficulties are not uncommon to this region, the Caribbean, like at all. I mean, there's a lot of people who think it defines us. I don't think it's a definition. I think it informs things, but I don't think it's a definition. I think we make that. And that's kind of the spirit that we wanted to invoke in this, is this idea that we, in a time when everything feels out of our control and uncertain, we could be daring enough to want to build out a future for ourselves and to think about what it means to think about the future in a space that feels untenable to us. And then within that, folded into that. So from time, water has a perfect memory. It's this idea that, again, as I mentioned earlier, that we might be able to look to the way that the landscape, which has become a source of trauma for us, particularly the water, right? You know, if you think about the transatlantic slave trade, as well as like hurricanes, and as well as the era changing hurricane that is Dorian, if we're thinking about how the water has kind of been a space of contention for us, but also it's so tied to our livelihood, you know, because of, you know, the water is what brings tourists, the, you know, fish is like how people used to sustain themselves. Like there's like a lot of this, it's a really difficult relationship, I guess, is what it feels like with the water. But there's something about the ways that we've interacted with our environment that I think we are letting ourselves get a little bit removed from, particularly the coastline, when you're thinking about how much development has been, particularly in Nassau, removing people from their access to the beach. and how that, as much again as it's like for some a space of trauma, it's also a space of restoration, you know? Because even here, it's like people just drive up, park next to the beach, don't even go on the beach, park up next to the beach, and you feel better. You feel like you're doing something kind for yourself. There's something really kind of lovely about that. And it feels like a reclamation, I think. So I think that's kind of what I think a lot of the exhibition is trying to get at, is that sort of spiritedness of like wanting to dare to hope, to dare to build something for yourself when it seems impossible. Because that becomes an act of, you know, it becomes a radical act, I think, in general. Black people in hope, radical act.
Yeah,
definitely.
really. Hope is a weapon.
Hope is a weapon.
So we have it up. I'm gonna share the blind screen first, because I want to remind everyone that the link to view the exhibition is in the description. But if you want to find us yourself, you just need to go to nagb.org.bs. And I'm hoping this is showing up on the screen.
Yep, it is. It is. You're good. You're good. If it wasn't, I would tell you.
Okay. So you just go to this is our main webpage. And once you get to the main webpage, you want to go right here to exhibitions. And once you click on exhibitions, under online exhibitions, we are the first one right here, ITE Abaco. And if you want just information on the show, you can use our homepage where we have the opening. But to view the actual exhibition, you need to click here where it says virtual exhibition. Okay.
Yes, and this is where the goodness starts.
Right. So we have our intro. Natalie just gave a beautiful intro, so you don't have to read that until you want to view again with your family. But here's where you will see the actual virtual exhibition. So I'm going to click play on this so Natalie can begin the virtual tour.
Boop, boop. And it's like we tried to, because I think this is also important to talk about. It's like the process. We tried to build it out in such a way, the web pages, to build it out in such a way that's hopefully a little bit kinder to your internet bandwidth and capabilities. Yeah. Anyway, so this is within the walls of our museum. Myself and Ziria put this up all by our lonesomes because we just bad like that. And as you can see, that sort of, that little niche, that little nook over there, that's kind of, this is a great spot to stop at, Z. Yeah. This is like, essentially, this is like your intro to the show. This is like, you know, we usually, when we take it around, we would have, you know, a physical space and have up these wall texts and the sort of branding for the show. So it gives like a little bit of cohesiveness, but then, you know, it'll kind of like go out and build out after that. So this little nook that we're in, which we're going to walk into, which I was just in today, which is really kind of great. Next to our very unsexy exit door. I mean, life, you know. So these series of photographs, which you'll be able to see better on the website as well. If you scroll down, you can see there's different themes and different sections. And this section is called Looking Back. And it's got all these essentially historical photos from the, I think around like the 1850s to the early 1900s. Yes. And again, as I mentioned before, it's very much about like, you can't view them as just truth as an object. It's like, it's kind of like, you know how you can't trust just what someone says about someone until you meet them. That's kind of what this is like in terms of looking at ourselves as Bahamians and Bahamian history. So it's like, these images show us how we were seen. They give you bits of, you know, sort of insights into physically how things would look. But, you know, if you also look at like the way that some people were framed, they, you know, because of the nature of cameras at the time, as well as the nature of the person behind the camera, like, you know, they're sort of situated in a certain way. There's something really kind of weird and interesting about that, the performance that we have, because we still live in a service space. So we always have to perform, right? There's something kind of, again, contentious and difficult there, but I find it interesting. And when we're looking at some of these photos, there's like photos of like the old Royal Victoria Hotel, old home. Yeah, you can zoom in on that. Actually, I love that one. That's great. We'll stop on that. There's, you know, the ways that people used to build out their houses, depending on what their means were. Looking at plantations, which is a rightfully dirty word. And it's just really like, it's fascinating to look at because it just feels like it starts to tell the story of what our background is when we come from a space where we don't get to have that much sort of material around our history, because we don't get to see that many old photos of the Bahamas. We don't really get to see, I mean, we have real big problems with like, sort of archiving and documenting things because of the inequalities around living in a formerly colonial space, who was allowed to document things, what was considered important to document, the difficulties around whether or not you want to save certain things because they're uncomfortable, and stuff like that. So it's just kind of like, I find it a really, it feels affirming to know that you, in a space that constantly gets like our physical, cultural material raised to the ground because of hurricanes, because I'm from Grand Bahama, and I know y'all know, in Abaco as well, because like we be tag teaming y'all. But like, if you come from a space where, like me, you've grown up with people who don't have baby pictures, then there's something really important about being able to see yourself. And that's kind of part of the grounding of what we've got here is like, we've been here from time, we come from things, and we get to tell that story now because it used to be told for us and we get to tell it now. And that's why there's this sort of wanting to be really affirmative and reclaiming a sense of self in our space. The next section we can go to, Ziria, let's zoom out. Let's go to, not that wall. Let's go to the wall that's opposite. One sec, where the sustainable stuff is. There we go. Yes.
Here.
Go forward. Yes, please. Please.
Oh, forward.
Yeah. Forward.
Forward. Okay. We starting with these ones.
Yes. So this wall, this section, is dealing with ideas of sustainability and survival. So it's looking really directly at like, what is our everyday life like right now? So it's sort of this like contrast to the historical photos and dealing with things that feel a lot more now. Even though there's a lot of crossover, particularly when it comes to people living in struggle, just saying. So it's like we made progressions, but in what sense? Like, it's like, is it the same poverty, but it looks different because your house looks different now, if you have a house, so there's works here on this wall that kind of are relating to the difficulties around development in the country, particularly in Nassau, and the way that landscape's changed, dealing with the ways that, our sort of, interest in tourism and foreign direct investment, how they've impacted the landscape physically. There's this piece that's right in the center now called Conch Gatherer. So we're all thinking right now about like, outside of pandemic and hurricane traumas and all the other things that we have going on, we're also thinking about like, bae, are my great grandchildren and grandchildren gonna be able to know what conch tastes like?
Yep.
Right.
Yeah.
Because it's like, it's part of the culture. Like it's
key. Conch is necessary to life.
It is.
And everyone should be able to have it. Right, but also when I treat it in a way so that great, like you said, our children, our great grandchildren will be able to also know
absolutely
about a part of our culture.
Exactly.
And so they can argue about it, whether or not mayonnaise goes in conch salad.
Oh man, no. But pickle conch, no. Pickle conch, I know. Grand Bahama weird. I know, but that's the vibe though. That's the vibe. But for real, and it's just like, when you think about the fact that like conch has a history in our space socially from the Arawaks, right? It's like, we don't even have like an easy access to evidence of our, indigenous peoples right now. It's still very much, it's there in the culture, but it's like understanding that is hard because it's not something that we feel like we were directly taught, right? But it's there, but like, we don't even have access to that fully, but that is part of our like cultural lineage. You know what I mean? There's something really outstanding and beautiful about that. But if we don't preserve it, then, our collective luck, like,
us.
Yeah, like, exactly. So like, when you're looking at this, it's like, you have this thing with like, this person who's doing the sustainable fishing of conch in between two images that are very much centered around tourism and our frankly unsustainable tourism practices in the Bahamas and the ways that they've like, ruined the landscape physically, but also how it's caused a lot of social strain on us. Because if you think about the fact that you live in a culture where people feel like they have to perform a certain sense of themselves and their identity, the way we feel like we have to perform a certain filtered kind of Bahamianness for the sake of keeping a job, that takes a big toll on things. And it's like you're doing all this work and you're doing all this emotional labor, and it isn't even really enough for you to be able to put enough food on the table, or to like, you know, because like if your car break down, then like your life shouldn't have to like end. You shouldn't have to worry about how you can feed yourself, how you're going to make sure you feed your children, none of that. So it's like there's these pieces, if you can zoom in on the Max Taylor's Syria, there's these pieces that are speaking directly to that. So it's called It's Better in the Bahamas. And they're both these beautiful woodcut prints by Maxwell Taylor, who I personally consider to be the father of Bahamian art, because he's the first one who showed us outside of a tourist gaze, which is kind of crazy. He was actually showing the reality of like,
I'm sorry, this is a very teachable moment. If you can censor an image while you're trying to see, you want to find a little circle in front of it.
yes,
Click, and then the software will just center the image in front of you, and you can just zoom.
yes,
Pleasure.
find your little stepping stone and then get in. So yeah, he's basically, he was the first person, I think, in our from like sort of modern art down sort of Europe, but also I think perhaps one of the first people like in our history to be able to show the way Bahamians were really living, like in an artistic sense, trying to like, you know, make that scene using his, you know, his voice, his experiences, because he grew up in Over the Hill, which is the community that we're in, which is a really historic community in Nassau. And he uses this very labor intensive method of like cutting out these little chunks of wood to make this image that then has to be like, sort of, you have to like, you basically, you have the plate, it's a piece of wood. This is printmaking 101, y'all. Forgive me for anything I get wrong, for everybody who knows a lot better. You got your piece of wood, you have your tools to be able to do the woodcut, which are kind of like these very specially shaped little like chisels and little scoopy to-dos. And you scoop out all these sort of, you know, basically you have to work, and for all of it, you kind of have to work your brain backwards. You have to cut out the light parts, whereas normally if you think about the way that you draw in the dark parts, you draw in the shadows, right? So this, he has to kind of work the opposite way, because wherever he puts the ink on the thing after, whatever's not scooped out is going to take up color. So he's sort of, you know, tugs away at making sure he gets this image done, scooping all the little bits of wood, inks it up, sticks the paper on, and he used to use, and I think he still uses, a spoon, like a big old spoon on the back to rub it to get the image to stay. He might use a little different now, because he might just be like, let me not bust up my elbow and my shoulder, but because he, you know, he's a mature man. And but like he used to just be right there with his spoon. And it's like, if you look on Zira, if you go towards where the immigrants piece is, sorry, which is, yes, perfect. Getting out. So for this piece, it's like when you see, if you knew how like big this is in person, it's like
the wall is like 10 feet high, isn't it?
Yeah, it's a big work. It's a big artwork. It's like probably 3 foot tall and maybe like 4.5 foot wide. And this piece is about migrated people who are, you know, forced to move somewhere else, an experience that we know very well in recent times because of Dorian, but also it's literally what our history is as Bahamians. We're like the Caribbean in general. We're all a space that's made up of people from elsewhere. I believe that's how the late, great Stuart Hall said it, a Jamaican cultural theorist. And like, they're so detailed and involved. You'll be able to see the close-ups better when you like scroll through the website. So there's like, you know, 2 resources for you to be able to like look at the exhibition, feel what the space is like, and then you can dig into works the way that you would if you were like, you know, walking up closer to it in the space, right? Which I think is kind of a beautiful thing. And then Ziria, if we can go to the last wall with all the Afrofuturisty goodness. So there's a lot of themes, or not themes. There's a lot of visual metaphors in this show, I should say. So visual subject matter and content of the paintings that kind of deals with ideas of migration and movement, whether it's from, you know, transatlantic histories to climate crisis. voluntary movements as well, because, you know, we also have Greeks and Chinese who came over. So there's something that we both agreed would be important to focus on, which is this idea that we're all from somewhere else. So there's this nature of us being in this together because none of us were supposed to be here, but we've made this place home, right? So if you're looking at that piece by LeVar Monroe with the little pink house that's on all the spindly legs. Yes. Oh, that's perfect. I like this little highlighter. That's great. Sorry, that's wonderful. It's literally this idea of having to carry your sense of home on your back, right? There's something really poignant and perhaps to the outside eye tragic about it. But for us, it's like, I think that's what makes the Black diaspora so special. It's what makes the Caribbean diaspora so special, regardless of race or creed. And I think that's kind of the thing that's people who don't know better would pity you. But if you're from here, it's like, it's a thing that's a strength. It's a thing that makes you know yourself differently than other people get to know themselves, because like a Bahamian still a Bahamian, no matter where you go. Jamaican still Jamaican, even if they're like third generation growing up in London. You know what I mean? Like there's something, I think, really, truly resilient and marvelous about it. And I don't mean resilient as in like, because can we talk about how the word resilient was just really like problematic after Dorian and like how it's generally been problematic. So like, again, thinking about majority Black space, there's always this idea that people who have consistently dealt with struggle are so resilient and therefore they don't need help. And it's like, we need help, dog. Like we need help, mate. Like, and I think that's the kind of thing, again, that we're sort of getting at. It's like, it's not just these moments where things are at their worst. You know, we need to offer this sense of camaraderie and collaboration with each other regularly, you know, because as Jana and Will were mentioning, like, you know, we exist in a space that feels like a space of scarcity, but it doesn't have to be that. It's just how we are conducting ourselves is not a way that's sustainable for us. And it's not the way that we're going to continue to be able to, you know, build our lives out here. We just have to do something different. It doesn't mean we have to be elsewhere, but we have to do something different. And the rest of the world needs to do better with their carbon emissions. So, you know, just saying. Right. So there's this piece, I think I might close out on this one by Jolyon Smith with the Robot Man. This really kind of wild work. I think it's from the 80s even. I think it's from the late 80s or early 90s. This man who is quite literally a person of color. The color is blue, but he's a person of color. And it's this sort of, he was really sort of trying to tie into this idea of, I mean, I don't know, I'm assuming it's purposeful on his part, but this is what I get from it. He's tying into this idea of the Afrofuturism, which was started in the 70s and was this social sort of resistance, I guess, to the idea that, you know, Black people and Black diaspora, Caribbean, that we just, people of trauma, essentially, that we are all just living in and shaped by the past. It's the idea of moving just, not even outside of that, moving forward with that and imagining like we are people who are from this space, we come from these traumas and things, but like that's not the only thing that defines us. And it's like daring to imagine a future is like a really, really big part of Afrofuturism, daring to imagine a future while Black. And thinking about the fact this movement came out of like the 70s and the 60s and like, you know, all of that civil activism that was like going on. There's something I think really lovely about that. And his work, though it's made in the 80s, is like really tying into that because I mean, you know, the fight don't stop until everybody okay.
You
right?
feel like it would eventually, like, okay, we've like fixed it. And it's like, no, still doing it.
We still here and tired. So tired. So there's something that I find really kind of raw and lovely about it in that sense of being like, you know, it's this weird sort of looking at the future in the sometimes cartoonish senses that we look at it. But I mean, life is very much kind of tied into these things now, you know, like the idea of living in a pod, the idea of being part bionic, the idea of having to preserve nature in bubbles so that we can like have it almost as like a virtual arc for the future. You know what I mean? There's these blueprints and things. It's like, that's kind of how I look at this piece. And I think for me, that was one of the really big motivators for the show was like, you know, as I said, being brave enough to imagine a future when it feels like in a lot of ways, the world that we live in, whether it's the climate or socially, you feel like it doesn't want you to be there because it's not up to them, it's up to us.
Yeah.
I think that's the note I want to end on, I think.
That's amazing. Thank you, Natalie.
Thank you so much.
Everybody for tuning in whenever you tuned in. If you have questions at any time, feel free to drop it under the video. The links are in the description for you to view the, I'm going to stop sharing my screen. That'd be great. But the links are in the description for you to view the exhibition. So the exhibition will be up until January 31st. If you want one of us to give you a virtual tour, that is also an option.
Oh yeah, man, we like to talk. We like to talk.
But I hope you all take the time to not only explore the exhibition for yourself, but also to share with a friend. It's a great Christmas activity.
We just work hard. So come look at the nice thing. It's your stuff. It's your national
collection. Yours. It's the national collection. It belongs to you. Mm-hmm. We want you to see it.
You literally own artwork. You could show off artwork that you own. Do it. Go for it. Thank you so much, Z.
Thank you so much, Natalie. It's a pleasure working with you. And
always.
We are here for you at any time. Thank you for tuning in and good night.
Night, y'all. Thank you.